Peace be upon you, and God's mercy and blessings. There is no doubt that there is historical information that many of us grew up with and treat as facts. However, with the advancement of science, new things have emerged that have taught us about ancient civilizations and peoples that we did not know before, to such an extent that some of this information might lead to a complete rewriting of history itself, and allow us to revisit ideas that have been entrenched in our minds for hundreds of years. Hello, I'm Amr Abedin, but before we start, if you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you can receive our videos as soon as they are released. By the way, we created a new channel called Hakawi, where we publish longer videos telling stories. It's realistic, intriguing, and exciting. Join in and you'll like it, God willing. Over the years, it has been ingrained in people's minds that the Hyksos were nomadic tribes that came from East Asia and suddenly invaded the lands of Egypt. They entered from the Sinai, fought the Egyptians, and seized their resources, and even took control of the rule for decades. The years and this narrative describing the Hyksos were largely based on the writings of the Ptolemaic priest Manetho, and his account was the only narrative detailing the rise of the Hyksos to power and their fall. However, the problem is that Manetho was born after the Hyksos rule, approximately 1200 years later, and for that reason, his account, despite being the prevailing narrative, was met with skepticism by many researchers, and those interested in the sciences of history have always felt that there was something exaggerated that was not understood by them. How could some simply pastoral groups suddenly overcome the armies of the ancient Egyptians and take power? Recently, a study from a British university has emerged, clarifying that the Hyksos did not invade Egypt suddenly or anything like that. The narrative says that they were actually living among the Egyptians in the city where the Hyksos lived in Egypt before it became their capital. At that time, it was the city of Avaris in eastern Delta, which is the city of Tel El Daba today. The researchers in this study conducted an analysis of the remains of bodies that were buried in the area there over different time periods, and studied as well the method of burial for some corpses, which was different from the traditional burial method of the ancient Egyptians, and the result they reached was that the Hyksos lived in this place about 300 years before they came to power. They lived there a normal life, having houses and family units, with children, not just warrior soldiers, but due to the turmoil that it happened in Egypt during the period of the 13th and 14th dynasties, and due to the division of power between the north and the south, the Hyksos took advantage of the situation and the wars of the Egyptian kings. They seized power and formed the 15th dynasty, which ruled Egypt afterward. So, the issue wasn't simply a military campaign that suddenly appeared out of nowhere, as is commonly believed. These were Asian peoples who lived in Egypt for a long time and coveted the rule during a certain time when the situation in Egypt was unstable. And of course, we will also take the narrative that this study presents as being 100% correct. It's very likely that this study also did not reach the truth. In the reign of the 18th dynasty, after the expulsion of the Hyksos from Egypt about 200 years ago, King Tutankhamun emerged, who is considered one of the most famous kings in. The reason for his great fame is the discovery of his tomb, and his treasures are preserved completely, which is unlike all the royal tombs that have been discovered up to this stage. One of the fascinating things associated with King Tutankhamun is the mystery of his death. King Tut died at a very young age, around 18, and when they conducted X-ray examinations on his mummy, the year 1968, they discovered that he had a concussion in his brain and bone fragments inside his skull, as well as a fracture in his left thigh. And because of this, they assumed that he died as a result of an assassination, and fingers pointed. The second suspect was the king's minister, who declared himself pharaoh for the country immediately after his death. And it continued to be a narrative for many years until a team of researchers came. In a new report, it was stated that the cause of King Tutankhamun's death was that he suffered an accident during one of his hunting trips when he fell from the chariot he was riding, dying 2 days after the accident. The result of the death was blood poisoning and gangrene resulting from the wounds and fractures that he sustained, and as for the opening found in the skull, it became clear after that it wasn't due to him getting hit on the head or anything. This happened while the researchers were removing the layers of the embalming cloth from the mummy. Let's leave Egypt and head to our Roman neighbors. A volcano, Mount Vesuvius, is the most famous volcano in the ancient city of Pompeii in Italy, and is arguably the most famous volcano in the whole world. It is considered one of the active volcanoes that have erupted many times. However, the most famous and violent eruption occurred in the year 79 AD, and it was well documented.